The email pinged, and the subject line was deceptively simple. Thanksgiving plans. 2 weeks. It had been exactly 2 weeks since I'd wired my family $4,800, a hefty sum meant to ensure they wouldn't spend another winter shivering in their old, drafty house. I clicked it open, a knot already forming in my stomach. It wasn't a dramatic blow-up. No screaming matches, no doors slammed for cinematic effect. Just a quiet, almost surgical phone call a few days prior, and a single sentence from my father that landed like a stone in water. "Lyra, honey," he'd said, his voice smooth. "Cassidy's been a bit tense lately. We think it's best if you just stay put this year." Stay put. That was it. No real explanation, definitely no apology. Just a polite little shove out the door, wrapped up in a flimsy excuse about my younger sister's delicate peace of mind. I remember staring at my phone afterward, feeling like it had somehow betrayed me, like it had learned a foreign language just to deliver that blow. This was after nearly 2 years of me being their human furnace, the one who made sure the heating bills for that money pit of a house were paid. 2 years of watching Cassidy, my perpetually finding herself sister, burn through thousands on a revolving door of failed craft businesses and influencer dreams, while I picked up extra shifts at the warehouse to keep their ancient furnace chugging along. And now? Now I was the one benched. Not for anything I'd actually done, but because my mere presence might upset Cassidy. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked to my tiny kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea I couldn't really taste, and sat staring at the bland beige wall of my apartment. And in that quiet, numbing moment, a decision crystallized, hard and clear. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table where my welcome was apparently conditional on the thermostat reading a comfortable 72 degrees, paid for by me. That was the precise moment I stopped being their safety net. And, as it turned out, it was the moment they began to understand the real biting cost of cutting me out. The morning after that phone call, I found myself standing by my apartment window, clutching the same chipped ceramic mug I'd owned since my freshman year of college. Outside, Milwaukee was already wearing its November gray like a well-worn coat. The wind, sharp and insistent, scratched at the window pane. I could hear the distant, muffled sounds of my neighbors starting their day, the scrape of boots on icy sidewalks, the groan of car engines reluctantly coming to life. It was hard to pinpoint what stung more, my father's voice, so casual and unbothered as he delivered the news, or the chilling realization that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. They had discussed it, rehearsed it, all without me. They hadn't called to ask, to talk it through. They'd called to inform Cassidy. She was always the sensitive one, the family's own little emotional weather system. Everyone tiptoed around her moods, her anxieties, her latest drama. I was the other one, the stable one, the one who knew how to keep her voice low when tensions flared, the one who quietly sent money without anyone needing to explicitly ask. Last January, Dad had called me close to midnight, his voice cracking with panic. The furnace had given up the ghost, and Mom was beside herself crying from the biting cold in their own living room. I'd paid the emergency repair bill in full the very next morning. In March, when the heat sputtered out again, I covered those costs too. Then, in September, anticipating the first cold snap, I'd sent another $400. No one ever really said, "Thank you," not in a way that felt meaningful. But I hadn't done it for the applause. I did it because I thought that's what family did. You filled in the cracks, you propped each other up. Apparently, it also meant I had no say when Cassidy was feeling tense. That morning, nursing my lukewarm tea, I sat down at my small desk and opened my laptop. I navigated to the utility company's website, the account I'd been managing and paying on their behalf for 2 long winters. My cursor hovered over the Cancel Service button. For a beat, I hesitated. Then I clicked. A small pop-up appeared. Service scheduled to end November 2nd. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The anger hadn't arrived yet. What I felt was a strange, hollow sense of doneness. It's funny, isn't it? How quiet your mind can become when you finally let go of a burden that was never truly yours to carry. For years, I'd shouldered their worries as if they were my own. Every single winter, when their ancient pipes groaned and their oil tank dipped precariously low, I was the one picking up extra shifts down at the shipping dock, logging into my online banking, and sending whatever I could scrape together. Not because they explicitly asked, not usually, but because it was clear that no one else would. Cassidy was always far too busy building her brand. One year, it was artisanal, hand-poured candles that smelled faintly of disappointment. The next, it was a podcast about, well, I'm still not sure what it was about, but it barely lasted 6 episodes. She'd borrow money from mom and dad, money I knew they didn't really have, burn through it with alarming speed, and then flood her Instagram with carefully curated images. Latte art, rooftop brunches with equally aspirational friends, designer coats bought on credit, all tagged with daughter hustle life and nawer girl boss. While she was photographing her matcha lattes, I was often hauling heavy pallets through the biting cold of the loading docks, my fingers stiff and aching, a bone-deep weariness settling into me. I never told them about the new winter coat I'd foregone for myself just to keep their thermostat humming. I never mentioned the countless times I'd canceled dinner plans with coworkers because their heating bill had unexpectedly landed, heavier than usual. They never asked, and I, foolishly, never offered the information. The very last payment I'd made, just before the Thanksgiving decree, was that $400 10 months ago. I logged it meticulously, just like all the others, in a simple spreadsheet, tucked away in a folder on my computer grimly titled Family Winter Support. Every single transfer was marked with the same quiet, desperate hope. So they won't have to worry. But that phone call, "Stay home this year, Lyra." It snapped something deep inside me. It wasn't a fiery rage, not even a profound sadness. Just a sudden cold clarity I hadn't experienced in years. They hadn't excluded me because I'd somehow failed them. They'd excluded me because I'd made their lives too easy. I was the silent, invisible fix-it person behind every looming problem. And now that things felt relatively calm because I had worked tirelessly to make them so, I was apparently no longer essential. So I stepped back. And I let the cold in. November arrived like a physical blow that year. An early, aggressive snowstorm. A bitter, relentless wind. The kind that rattles old window frames and seems to seep through the very walls like a chilling memory. I didn't expect them to notice the missing payments immediately. That was the silent curse of being the one who always handled everything. You become invisible until something finally breaks. But I knew. I knew the oil deliveries would stop. I knew the thermostat in their house would begin its slow, inexorable descent 1 degree at a time. And I knew, with a grim certainty, exactly how long it would take before someone reached out. The first message blinked onto my phone screen 4 days after the cancellation date. It was from my mother, her tone soft, almost breathtakingly oblivious. "Hey, sweetie, the heat's acting a bit strange. Could you check the account? Might be a system glitch." A system glitch. Not a single word about how I was doing. Not one mention of Thanksgiving. I didn't reply. The next day, Cassidy chimed in with her typical brand of subtle tact. A text message, blunt and to the point. So childish. No greeting, no context, just the accusation. She probably assumed I was throwing some sort of tantrum, sulking because my feelings were hurt. She had no idea that I had planned this silence, this withdrawal, like a calculated chess move, not to win, because this was never a game I wanted to play, but to finally stop losing. Then came Dad. He called once. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was sharp, clipped, and devoid of any warmth. "Lyra, I don't know what's going on, but the house is at 58 degrees. If you did something, you need to fix it. Call me." Not, "What happened?" Not, "Are you okay?" Just, "Fix it." That was the crux of the problem, wasn't it? To them, I was always the fixer. The one who showed up, unasked, to clean up messes. The one who didn't require thanks or acknowledgement, just quiet utility. I didn't listen to the rest of his voicemail. Instead, I pulled on my own warm coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and walked the 3 blocks through the steadily falling snow to the little independent bookstore on Oak Street. I browsed the dusty, comforting aisles for over an hour, breathing, in the scent of old paper and ink, feeling like I had all the time in the world. Then I settled into a cozy armchair at the small cafe next door, a new paperback in one hand and a warm, cinnamon-dusted waffle in the other. I watched people come and go, laughing, rushing, living their lives, and I just sat there, still, allowing myself to exist completely outside the orbit of the constant emergency my family seemed to cultivate. That's when it truly hit me. This silence, this distance, wasn't a punishment I was inflicting. It was permission. Permission I was finally giving myself. Permission to stop fixing, to stop waiting for them to see me, to stop apologizing for drawing a line in the sand that should have been etched in stone years ago. I used to believe that love meant showing up, even when you weren't particularly wanted, even when it cost you. But I was starting to understand something new. Love without respect? That isn't love. It's labor. Unpaid, unspoken, and entirely unreturned. So I let the messages pile up, unread, unanswered. Because they weren't born from genuine concern for me. They sprang from inconvenience. And for the very first time in my adult life, I refused to be the solution to their discomfort. The snow kept falling, thick and deliberate. By November 10th, Milwaukee looked like a vintage postcard, all white rooftops, frozen sidewalks, and breath visibly misting, even indoors if you weren't careful. That morning, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I picked it up, more out of habit than anything else. "Hi, is this Miss Halden?" A polite, professional voice inquired. My grip tightened slightly on the warm mug in my hand. "Yes, this is she," I replied. "I'm calling from Northern Fuel Systems. You were listed as the primary contact for the heating account at 114 Langdon Street." A small, almost imperceptible pause. "Yes," I said. "I just wanted to confirm," the voice continued. "You're not planning to renew service? We haven't been able to reach the current occupants, and since the account was under your name, the cancellation went through as scheduled earlier this month." "That's correct," I stated, my voice clear and steady. "The contract was canceled, and it will not be renewed. I am no longer responsible for that address." There was a brief silence on the other end, then a quiet, "Understood. Thank you, Miss Halden." I hung up and stared out at the snow, still drifting lazily past my window. They hadn't even realized the account wasn't in their name. For 2 full winters, I had managed everything. The billing, the oil deliveries, the panicked calls for emergency maintenance. I had been their invisible infrastructure, the unseen hand keeping them warm. Now, without me, they were truly learning just how cold a Wisconsin November could be. Around the 14th, the messages resumed, more frequent now, a clear thread of rising, panic weaving through them. Mom. "Lyra, it's 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a coat indoors. Cassidy's coughing. Please, please call." Dad. A text this time. "This isn't about money anymore. This is about family." Cassidy. Another gem. "Pretend you were never part of this family. That's fine. We'll remember this." I didn't answer. Not because I was devoid of feeling, but because for the first time, I was allowing them to feel everything. The silence, the struggle, the unvarnished consequences of building a home on the back of someone they had refused to even seat at their table. And still, through it all, there was no apology. Only expectation. November 21st. 3 days before Thanksgiving. The cold outside had turned sharp, almost metallic. I was in my kitchen, humming softly to myself, in the middle of making a grilled cheese sandwich for dinner. 2 thick slices of sourdough, buttered right to the edges, the kind of simple, comforting meal that felt like a hug when the rest of the world felt unwelcoming. My phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it, but the preview of the message that flashed on the screen made me pause, cheese slicer mid-air. It was from Dad. "If you still consider yourself part of this family, Lyra, now's the time to prove it." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked the phone and slid it, face down, onto the kitchen table. There it was again. The test. The dare. The quiet, insidious gaslighting, all wrapped up in a pretty bow of familial obligation. To them, family wasn't a bond of love and mutual respect. It was a role. a script I was expected to perform. And somehow, by refusing to freeze along with them, I had failed my audition. I finished cooking my sandwich, plated it carefully, and sat down on my comfortable sofa. I took slow, deliberate bites, chewing through the silence in my warm apartment. Outside, the wind howled against the building, a mournful sound that could have been a warning or perhaps a reminder. At precisely 7:42 p.m., my doorbell rang. It wasn't a casual, friendly knock. This was steady, insistent, demanding. I stood up, walked slowly to the door, and peered through the peephole. It was my father. His gray coat was zipped all the way to his chin, snowflakes clinging to his boots, and the collar. His face was drawn tight with a mixture of cold and raw frustration. I opened the door just a few inches. The warm air from my apartment immediately billowed out, hitting his face. He blinked rapidly, his eyes adjusting to the sudden contrast. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, rough. "We need to talk." I didn't move. From my spot, didn't open the door any wider. "I don't think tonight is the right time, Dad." "You cut the heat," he stated flatly, not a question, but an accusation. "I didn't cut anything," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. "I stopped paying for it. There's a distinct difference." He squinted, his eyes narrowed. "The company didn't even notify us." "That's because the account was under my name," I said, keeping my tone even. "For 2 years. Over $8,000, Dad." I let the words hang in the cold air between us. "And then, with one short phone call, you decided I shouldn't come home for Thanksgiving, all to keep Cassidy calm." "She's been struggling, Lyra. You know that," he said, his voice losing some of its hard edge. I shook my head slowly. "No, Dad. Cassidy has been bailed out by all of you, over and over again. I struggled too, you know. I just didn't make it everyone else's problem." He looked down at the worn doormat, avoiding my gaze. "We've sold what we can. Your mother, she's sick with worry. It's 38 degrees inside the house, Lyra." I didn't budge. "You told me to stay away to keep the peace," I reminded him gently. "So I stayed away, and I found my peace. Now, maybe it's your turn to figure out what your peace costs." He exhaled slowly, a ragged sound, as if he was only just then realizing the true weight of what I'd been carrying for them, far beyond just a utility bill. "You're punishing us," he said again, his voice softer now, almost a plea. "No," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "I'm not punishing you. I'm just finally letting you feel what it's like when I stop carrying everything for everyone." He didn't speak again. After a long, heavy moment, he turned and walked back into the swirling snow. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate, as if he couldn't decide whether he was more angry or ashamed. I closed the door, the latch clicking softly into place. It wasn't a loud sound, but it felt profoundly final. The snow didn't let up for days. By the time the long Thanksgiving weekend finally drew to a close, Milwaukee was buried under a thick, silent blanket of white. The streets were eerily quiet, hushed and still. It had been almost a week since my father had stood at my door. A week since he'd left without the answers he'd come for. A week since I'd stopped wondering if they would ever see me as more than just their personal solution provider. I was folding a soft wool sweater on my couch, the steady, comforting hum of my little space heater filling the quiet room, when the doorbell rang again. This time, the sound wasn't forceful or demanding. It was soft, hesitant, almost unsure, as if whoever stood on the other side wasn't entirely convinced they'd be welcomed. I peeked through the peephole. It was my mother. She was wrapped in a bulky, unfamiliar coat that looked borrowed, a scarf, cinched almost too tightly around her neck, her hair flattened by the persistent snow. Her shoulders were hunched as if the weight she'd been carrying had finally, physically, caught up to her. She didn't hold herself like someone who had come to win an argument. She looked like someone who had come to surrender. I opened the door, just a fraction, the cold air immediately sliding in, a stark contrast to the warmth of my apartment. "Lyra," she said, her voice cracking, either from the biting wind or something deeper, more broken. "I know I should have called, but I didn't know if you'd pick up." I didn't speak, just waited. I took the bus, she said, her gaze dropping, to her snow-covered boots. Walked from the station. It took over an hour. I leaned against the doorframe, my hand still on the knob, still bracing myself for the inevitable wave of guilt, for the excuses, for the pleas. But she didn't offer any. Not right away. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, her voice low, hesitant, since that call. About everything. And I need to say it. I was wrong, Lyra. Her voice shook. Not just about Thanksgiving, about the way I let things happen. The way I stood by and watched you carry things that were never yours to carry. I never should have allowed that. I crossed my arms over my chest, not out of defiance, but more to hold something fragile inside me still. I saw you, she continued, her eyes still downcast. I saw you paying for things, covering the gaps, stepping in time and time again. And I told myself it was okay because you were strong, because you never complained. But I think I mistook your silence for consent. And that's on me, Lyra. That's on me. I swallowed hard against the lump that was rising in my throat. Because somewhere, buried deep beneath years of being overlooked and taken for, granted, a small, stubborn part of me still yearned for her to see it, to truly see me. Cassidy regrets it too, she added quietly, almost as an afterthought. She said this never should have happened. She's not doing well. A short, sharp breath escaped me, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Cassidy only ever regrets things when they backfire on her, Mom. I know, my mother said, finally looking up, her eyes meeting mine. They were tired, red-rimmed, but surprisingly clear. I know. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't say I'm sorry for the part I played in all of this. There was no manipulation in her gaze, no desperate begging. Just a weary woman standing out in the snow, trying to face the wreckage she had helped create. I don't want you to come back, Lyra, she said then, and the words surprised me. Not unless you truly want to. Not unless it feels right for you. I want you to know that you matter. Even if it took us far too long and far too much to finally say it. I opened the door a little wider then. Not to invite her in, not yet. But perhaps to let her feel a little of the warmth she had ignored for so long. The warmth of the home I had built for myself. The peace I had fought so hard to earn. I'm not angry anymore, Mom, I said. And I realized it was true. But I'm not the same daughter I was. I won't be the one holding this family together with duct tape and misplaced grace anymore. I've let that job go. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cold, chapped cheek. There was nothing left to say, really. We stood there for a few moments more, her on the outside, in the biting cold, me on the inside, surrounded by warmth. A quiet, invisible boundary marking who we had been and who we were now becoming. Then, she turned and walked away, her steps cautious on the icy path, one careful step at a time. I didn't close the door right away, but when I finally did, I didn't lock it out of fear or anger. I locked it out of peace. December settled in without any fanfare. It didn't need to announce its arrival. It just showed up, steady and silent, the way a season does when you finally stop keeping such anxious track of the days. The snow was a constant now, a soft, white blanket coating the rooftops, muffling the sounds of the city, making the world outside seem quieter, calmer. Inside my little apartment, everything was still. Not empty, not lonely. Just still. I'd fallen into a new rhythm, one that felt more like truly living than merely surviving. Early mornings started with strong coffee and a thick, knitted shawl wrapped around my shoulders. My little space heater buzzed softly in the corner, a faithful companion while I got ready for work, no longer rushing to head off someone else's impending emergency. In the evenings, I found myself wandering through the aisles of the local market, picking out fresh produce, a small bouquet of flowers, sometimes even a fancy pastry from the bakery, little indulgences I never used to allow myself. I'd come home, heat up a bowl of soup, read for hours, and sometimes I would just sit in the comfortable silence. Not the aching silence of being forgotten, but the peaceful silence of no longer needing to beg to be remembered. My phone stayed mostly quiet. No new accusatory messages, no surprise voicemails filled with demands. And I found, to my own surprise, that I didn't miss them. Dana, my cousin on my dad's side, kept in touch. She was a good soul, grounded and kind. Sometimes she'd call while I was in the middle of folding laundry or sautéing onions for dinner. She'd update me gently on the things I no longer asked about. Cassidy, she told me, had moved in with a friend temporarily after her latest boyfriend had bailed and another one of her brilliant projects had imploded. Dad, Dana said, had apparently sold Grandpa's old watch collection to pay for a delivery of heating oil. Mom, she'd heard, had been staying in a cheap motel off the highway for a while. Dana's voice always hesitated when she reached that part of the story. A little awkward, a little sad, but I never pressed for details. They were doing what they had to do, finally, just like I had done for all those years. Only when I had stepped back to save myself, I was called selfish. When they were forced to scramble, they were seen as struggling. One night during one of our calls, Dana said thoughtfully, "You know, Lyra, I think you're the only one in that entire family who actually managed to change." Maybe she was right, because that winter, for the very first time in as long as I could, remember, I didn't feel cold. Not on the outside, bundled in my own warm coat and scarves, and certainly not in that hollow pit in my chest where the guilt and resentment used to live. I didn't check Cassidy's social media anymore, curating her perfect imaginary life. I didn't waste energy wondering if Dad was still angry or if Mom missed me in a way that mattered. They had their silence, and I had mine. But my silence came with peace. It came with warm socks and mugs of ginger tea and a reliable heater, in a cozy apartment that I paid for entirely with my own 2 hands, and I had absolutely no desire to give any of that up.